This week, Zach Schlumpf, recruiting coordinator for IOActive, joins us for our feature interview. In our articles for discussion, we're going to talk about, I thought that said whining. It's actually winning. Maybe it's winning, whining arguments. No, it's winning arguments, turning insight into execution and avoiding the yes dilemma. In the news, we've got a lot of big updates from Bitdefender, McAfee, Barracuda Networks, Pwnie Express, ReversingLabs, and more. Stay tuned for this edition of Startup Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show about security startups, how to secure your startup, and advice for security startups. It's Startup Security Weekly.
I need it from the top.
Brought to you by, make sure your team is prepared to fight off the latest cybersecurity threat. IT Pro TV is the resource to keep you and your IT team skills up to date. You can stream IT Pro TV's courses live and on demand worldwide, so there's no need to send staff to off-site training. Their team solution provides access to a supervisor portal for full control over your team's training schedule and group analytics. Go to itpro.tv/startup security and use the code SS30 to try it free for 7 days and receive 30% off your monthly membership for the lifetime of your active subscription. To learn more about IT Pro TV's team solution, sign up for a free demo of their supervisor portal. Are you looking for a career where you can make a real difference? Accenture Security is looking for passionate, creative minds to tackle some of the biggest security threats facing us today. Innovative thinkers who want to outmaneuver cybercriminals. They're hiring specialists across the spectrum, from security strategy to cyber defense, digital identity, and application security, helping to deliver holistic solutions. If you want to use next-generation technologies and global resources to change the future of security, visit Accenture.com/security careers. Welcome, everyone, to the Raspberry Pi program today. This is not the Raspberry Pi program, although it should be, which is awesome. It looks like I have 3 Raspberry Pis, when in fact it's just one. And through the magic of technology, it looks like I have 3, which is great. Welcome to Startup Security Weekly. This is, in fact, December 1st. I am your host, Paul Asadorian, joined on the lines via Skype, the sand hobo himself, Mr. Michael Santarcangelo. Welcome to the program.
It's excited to be here.
You sound excited.
I had to turn up the temperature, Paul, because I apparently was too warm before.
You're too hot.
So hopefully,
you know what it is? You're too
I'm coming
hot.
in cool, baby.
Yeah.
I want to be cool for you.
You're always cool, sorta. Wow, it's going to be one of those shows today.
It feels like one of those shows. I poured water. I made a gross error in judgment today.
There should be more bourbon or something. You can hear from Larry Pesce and myself this week. Larry and I are doing a webcast with Pwnie Express. It's going to be so awesome and exciting. Larry and I are going to talk about wireless attacks in the enterprise, some of the threats that are facing you with an IoT twist, which is it's going to be really interesting. IoT threats in the enterprise. Paul Paget, who is now the Senior Vice President of Strategy, I want to say, Strategic Initiatives, something like that. We'll talk more about Pwnie Express later on in the program. So that's going to be fun. Paul's going to come down here to the studio. Hopefully Larry will be here in the studio. To have all 3 of us in the same room, it's just, I mean, you're just going to want to watch it just for that, really. Just all 3 of us in the same room. Larry and I have known Paul for a long time from previous endeavors, so it's going to be a lot of fun. That's happening next Thursday, December 7th, from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. You can register for that at securityweekly.com/Pwnie. I would like to introduce our special guest for this evening. It's Zach Schlumpf. Hopefully that's the last time I have to say your last name, because every time I say it, I feel like I'm saying it wrong. Who's the recruiting coordinator for IOActive. He's an Army veteran, former Red Teamer. I can't talk today. Volunteer with Seattle Locksport and various conventions. Zach, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me, Paul.
I didn't recognize you without your kilt.
I know. We were like twins there almost.
I know.
Starbucks,
Zach and I
kilts.
we're like kilt brothers. Like I thought more people were going to wear kilts. Not that I care.
I know. That was the only time I saw anyone wear kilts at HushCon or Derby. It was kind of funny. DEF CON, they're everywhere. HushCon, there's a few of them, but
there was like
I guess we're the only kilted guys over at Derby.
Yeah, it was like me and you and like maybe one other person on. I think it was the Friday of ShmooCon. Not Shmoo. See, now I'm getting the name wrong. Good Lord, of DerbyCon.
Oh yeah.
In any case, it's nice to have you.
Nice to see you, man.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about recruiting and getting jobs, as I think it really intersects with our conversations here on Startup Security Weekly, because one of the things that you're tasked with when you do a startup is hiring people, and it's such a critical part of the business, whether it's a new startup or a growing business, or as is the case with Security Weekly, right? I transitioned from Tenable and went to grow and build Security Weekly full time. I essentially had to start over and have a whole recruiting process and fill lots of positions because I was in a growth mode. And we talk about how startups are in a growth mode, but as your business grows, you hit various stages of growth that may, such as a funding round, force you to go out and hire people. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Michael, do you have anything to add to set the stage for our conversation today?
No, I mean, I think you did a great job. I'm going to stop right there. I'm looking forward to getting into the conversation because I think there's a lot here to talk about. So,
Zach, you had a very technical background. You're a red teamer.
Sort of technical.
Sort of technical.
More social.
Well, that would explain why you're in more of a social role today. So what was it like, how did you make that transition from being in the Army to being a red teamer, and then now to doing recruiting in the security community for a very technical roles, I'm assuming?
Well, so I ended up using my GI Bill from the military. I was in the infantry. Didn't do any tours, really. Went over to Korea, drank a lot. That was about it. I drank a lot. I was about 2 miles from the DMZ at a little base called Camp Graves, and there wasn't a whole lot to do over there. So, but anyway, fast forward a few years, used my GI Bill, got into IT stuff, mostly because I was lockpicking. I knew a lot of the local hackers, and I was saying, hey, I pick locks, and they're like, oh, we do too. What? There's other lock pickers out there? So I ended up meeting up with them, went to DEF CON. I'm like, wow, this is pretty cool. So I ended up getting into just a 2-year course for IT, talked my way into a social engineering position, essentially, for an internship with a local company. It was a little bit of a pen test puppy mill, and I didn't spend a whole lot of time there. And so I still wanted to be part of the industry. I didn't really enjoy that, but like
Zach,
I said, I did more of the social.
I just want to back up because I can't let go of this, that you had to talk your way into a social engineering position. I'd imagine that's how it happens if you're going to be a social engineer.
Irony,
right? They expect you to do some social engineering to get the position. I think that was great.
Right. So after the military, I was a door guy in bars and clubs and whatnot. So having people skills is a little important when you don't want to have to go to hands-on customer service to get people outside sometimes. So I got good with talking to people, So and I enjoy working with people. I like people. It's everywhere you go. Of course, social engineering, people are the weakest link. So being nice to them seemed to work out pretty well. So we were working on banks and credit unions for the most part. And just calling people up, being nice to them went a long ways, in my opinion. So we had a couple of coworkers that play the other side of the card. They'd just be disgruntled. Oh, I got to get this thing done. I need you to go check this thing on the network really quick. Here, check this link. And sometimes that'd work, but I seem to have better success just being nice to people. And then again, I also felt kind of bad doing it because they're trying to help a coworker.
Right.
So, but yeah, so I decided to go a little bit different. I said, hey, I have all these people skills. What else could I use it for? How could I stay in the industry still and be helpful? And I was like, recruiting. Why not? That's entirely people. What can I do to help out? I could get people jobs. Let's give that a shot. And just serendipitously, I was on the way to CanSec, where I helped volunteer with Atlas Dragos' big convention up there. And my friend Noid and I were on the train going up to CanSec, and he's like, so what are you up to? What do you think about it? I was like, well, I'm kind of thinking about doing recruiting. I'm going to look into that, see if I can maybe find an internal recruiter somewhere and do some informational interviews. By happenstance, the recruiter for IOActive was sitting in front of me at the time, Christy Miller, and she pops around the seat. She goes, hey, I'm Christy. I'm the recruiter at IOActive. Let's talk. So it was great. It was great timing.
That's great.
So she was very nice.
Yeah, and she was very nice.
Incredibly nice.
That's one of my favorite lines out of Roadhouse, right? Be nice. And, if they insult you, be nice.
Be nice.
Until it's time to not be nice.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I guess that's Paul's job to tell us when it's time to not be nice.
That's right. We're usually nice.
And I usually say give a mouse a cookie, too. So if you give a mouse a cookie, he's going to ask for a glass of milk. So sometimes you have these long conversations with trying to get people out the door. Hey, man, you have too much to drink. Oh, can I just finish this up? Oh, yeah, have another. Just finish your beer. It's cool. Oh, hey, I got to use the bathroom. Can I use the bathroom? Okay, man, you got to go. You got to go outside. Come on, So it's there's a real thin line of being polite but being stern with people. And, it's the bars were fun, but it's good to be out of them.
Well, it's a great story, Zach, and I think it's a great testament to our security community as well. And you don't have to necessarily pigeonhole yourself in one role or the other. And I think a lot of people think, well, I have to be in-depth technical and write exploits. That's that's a very valid skill and an important skill. But when we look at the business side of things, you have to take what skills you have. You have to take what you want to achieve in your career and go after it. And that you shouldn't think about how you'd be pigeonholed into a certain role. You said, hey, I want to go do recruiting. And as luck would have it, and certainly skill and effort, and that's what you did, which is great. So, Zach, let's say I have a startup, and I want to frame this discussion because, this is where John Strand and I, basically were and are to a certain extent. And we have a lot of visions, and we need people to help us fill out our vision and achieve our goals. And in this case, let's say we need to hire people who can write code and create software. How do you recommend that we recruit for that? Because I think a lot of startups and a lot of businesses are in that same position today where they need to hire people to build stuff, to build software. What kind of qualities do you look for in software developers?
Well, I think I would first, I try to go things about a little differently. You go on LinkedIn, you could send in mail to people and do that kind of normal standard recruitery thing. Hey, I work at such and such. I'm doing this thing. Come check me out here. We have this cool stuff ready. Or you could go to find out where they're passionate. There's a lot of cool meetups that I go to. If I'm looking for something specific, software-wise, personally, I'm not doing any engineer kind of positions. It's not what I look for. But if I was, there are amazing amounts of meetups out there specifically for different languages. I think that's the sort of route I'd go. I'd go buy some people beers and talk to them about what they're working on, what they like. And if it's local, that's easy. If it's for something remote, that might be a little more difficult. And the more standard kind of internet job opportunities, I think, would be a little bit better that way. But I think meetups and finding people in person is what I try to do.
It's so refreshing to hear you say that, Zach. It really is. But I think that's a really good message to send to founders to say, if you've got this idea to build something, to get involved with your local community, to have a beer with someone or hang out at a conference, maybe share some of your vision. As Michael and I recommend that companies that go into this really deep stealth mode, that's not necessarily the way that you want to roll, and share a little bit of your vision, see how that person reacts to that, and then make some determinations. I think that's a great point. Michael, questions along those lines?
Well, yeah, I want to start with a point, and then I'll circle back to the question. The point, and this is something we talk about in the show a lot. When we're looking at anything that has to do with the business of security, right? It works whether you're a vendor, it works whether you're a startup, it works whether you're a team. And I feel like I keep saying I've been vocal about this, so I'm just going to keep being vocal about it. I don't see that we really have a talent gap or a talent shortage. So let me start this way, because I think Zach and I agree on this, and we traded some messages beforehand. A lot of the way we traditionally recruit, I don't want to go so far as to say it's broken. So why don't we just say it's broken and it doesn't work very well? And what Zach just said was go meet people in person and be nice and figure out if you like each other and go from there. So when I look at this, I'm kind of curious, do you think that we have this talent gap, like Zach, by going to where you can find cool people, that share similar interests that you think would be great fits for what you're trying to do. Do you feel like you just they're not out there? You can't find them?
No, they're there. The problem is, finding them through the large amounts of people going to conventions and stuff like that. At DerbyCon, for instance, I was one of the volunteers there, and I talked to lots and lots of people. It just depends on the position you're looking for and the head count for it. I think we have a mentorship problem in security personally.
Oh, I agree with that. Yeah.
What a lot of it is, and one of the things, like I said, I'm not super technical. I know what's what. I know the right words and here and there. I know how to do a semi-technical interview, but when it comes down to it, everyone's way better than I am out there, and I know that I'm at best a skid, So I could use some tools, I could poke some buttons, and I could do the right thing. But there's people out there that design tools and things like that, and they could go off on tangents about how cool this one specific thing is, and I want to talk to them. I met Thomas, who made Aircrack NG at Derby, and we talked for hours about just cool stuff. If I wanted a wireless guy, I'd be talking to him if he didn't have anything else going on. But as far as the mentorship goes, a lot of it, there's a lot of old timers, the senior folk, and they're like, well, learn how to do it yourself. That's what I did. It's like, but you have this wealth of knowledge that you could probably convey, and I could skip a lot of the hitting my head against the wall thing for hours of trying to do it incorrectly and be like, oh, I missed a dash. I missed, an argument that I should have put in there, and that's what's been driving me crazy. Oh, I didn't tab the right way. I didn't have the right white space in this Python program. And that could save some time. So having good mentorship, I think, is incredibly important. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed and helped out. And there are great mentors out there. Leslie, Hacks for Pancakes, she does things like resume workshops and stuff like that and has all sorts of resources to help people. I think that's fabulous. And we need more of it.
So Michael's stance is that, and Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, that you believe we don't have... Is it a knowledge or a skills gap or both, or do you make a delineation between the two?
No, I think we probably need to make a delineation, and that's where I get fair. What I find is we chronically say there's a shortage, and then from that we'll say, well, there's either not enough people or there's not enough talent or there's not enough skills or whatever else. But then we meet people like Zach who say, no, I found a way. I go meet people. I'm nice. I figure out what they're up to. In any time, let me just be more simple. Anytime I meet somebody who tells me they have shortage, if I ask them, right, our questions, what problem are you trying to solve? What value does that create? If you hire that position, if you hire a person into that position, how is that valuable? What do they get done as a result? How are they going to get value out of it beyond the paycheck? What's your vision look like? I find the people who tell me they have a talent shortage can't answer any of those questions, Paul. But anytime somebody can answer those questions, they've got people lining up to be able to work with them. And so my position is, there are inefficiencies in our current marketplace, and it may be talent, it may be skills, but I think we can hire for that. And I think then, right, and lest we get too buzzwordy, but we keep presenting all the people that are giving us artificial intelligence and machine learning and new solutions. Yeah, tech should be offloading stuff that we don't need people to do anymore, and we can free up the talented folks to go solve really cool problems, and the people who are newer to it, we can build their skills. But like Zach pointed out, we don't have a mentorship, established mentorship. And the quick aside on that is, we don't even know what it means to be a mentor versus an advisor versus a coach, and that's a huge difference there. But also, we don't do good at development. We don't, in most places, have an ability to say, wow, I like your skill set, I like your aptitudes, and we're going to train you. We're going to level you up. And when we get people in, we're not necessarily good at leveling them up so they can stay or they can grow or they can take on leadership roles. Those are more structural issues. If we solve some of those things, a lot of these other problems go away. By the way, every industry tells me they've got shortages today, which means there's no shortages. We just don't know how to communicate, and we don't know what we're solving for.
Zach, many people have spoken with me over the years, and they view what we do, and I think there's people in our field that have the same view, whether they're conscious of it or not, that what we do as hackers, as the penetration testers or the security professionals, is somewhat of a black art, right? It's this super secret thing. Yeah, it's this super secret thing. And I mean, there's reasons for that. But when you go out into the marketplace to try and find people to fill positions, do you find that they're like, well, I don't really know that security thing because, as Michael said, and you also said too, like no one's really mentored me and taught me what I needed to know about this black art. Like, do they have that perception? And if they do, how do you overcome it to say, no, you actually might be the right fit?
Well, we're entirely security here, so I don't really have to deal with that issue as much. But like you said, I mean, I think media has a good portion to betray that. I mean, people are hacking, driving really quick in a car to pass a cat cable over to the airplane for whatever that was. And, you get things like that. There are some people that have learned. I mean, there's a lot of security professionals. Kevin Mitnick, for instance, he went to jail for doing cybercrime, right? So now he's a well-known security researcher and whatnot. So there are examples of people doing the bad guy stuff and turning good after a while, from different means.
I'm sorry, Zach, not necessarily I'm not talking about things that are illegal, but in other words, the way we develop exploits and tools and manipulate things is like magic. It's like black arts. Sure. And I think someone who might be a very talented systems administrator or network engineer or DevOps person may say, I don't get that whole black arts thing that you do. Like, I know it's not illegal, but like you do all this stuff and I don't know what it means. And it's like, no, you have the right skills. You just need a mentor or coach in security. So do you take people that like maybe have that mindset of, I don't understand that security thing, and you're like, no, you're the right candidate, here's how we'll bring you in and coach? Oh,
absolutely. Yeah. So I think like sysadmins, network engineers and whatnot, I think they have a great base. I talked to a guy who's entirely blue team that wanted to start dipping his toes into the red team stuff. Yeah. And they have an amazing background. Me personally, as when I started with, I jumped into the red team immediately. Did I suffer because I didn't have a great background? I had a 2-year, associate's degree from a college for, information technology, and that was about it. So would it have helped if I had a better background? Absolutely. One of the ways I talk to people about it is to get extremely nerdy and get into some Dungeons and Dragons here because I'm a nerd. It's like a prestige class. You start with a good basis of knowledge, and after a while you get these skills and you can say, hey, I could use this in a different way. How do the bad guys do things? What could I do to change my tactics to make this more offensive? What could I do to prevent that? Hey, there's this glaring security thing I missed because I looked at something differently. So I think that's pretty important, yeah. Not necessarily meaning you have to start off with those set of skills. I mean, you could develop those down the road for sure, but it's definitely a mentality thing for sure.
What do you think of the help desk, Zach? I'm sorry, Paul. I think
go ahead, Michael.
I think an untapped place is the help desk. I mean, so have you talked to people that have worked the help desk? Because I mean, think about it. They have to learn to be nice. They have to learn to explain things. They have to have patience. Oh, and they got to be pretty conversant across a whole bunch of stuff, typically.
Absolutely. And I think help desk.
I don't think we tap into that nearly enough. And I've never met anybody who said, my career ambition is to work a help desk. Like, I see that as that's how you get your foot in the door. That's how you get started. I think it's a great way to get experience. I don't understand why we're not doing a better job of leveling people up and say, hey, those of you who have these interests, come follow us, right?
I completely agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. One of my coworkers that was a phenomenal red teamer. He came from a help desk background. And like you said, you got to get people skills. You'll be able to talk to people. And soft skills, I think, are incredibly underrated. You write some amazing code. Well, you can't talk to people very well. That doesn't really help sometimes,
Yeah,
it's crazy how we call them soft skills. We call them soft skills, and they are so hard to acquire.
They are.
It's
absolutely
crazy.
But the help desk example is great because it's not just the soft skills, air quotes, soft skills that you're acquiring. It's also exposure to a lot of different technology and how that technology works. The other big thing that you get as a help desk is your ability to troubleshoot. Those of us that have done anything in security, network systems administration have spent probably half of our career figuring out why something doesn't work. And that is, regardless of how well you know the technology or not, the skill of troubleshooting is something that can be learned from working in a help desk. And so I wholeheartedly agree that we need to embrace that as a career path for people, because what I see is that students are graduating from a degree program in security, and they want to go start being a level 1 SOC analyst. And they, quite frankly, have no idea what they're looking at because they haven't spent time as a help desk person, as a systems administrator, or a network engineer. Zach, how closely do you look at those skills of building a foundation before you're hiring someone into your organization?
Oh, it's absolutely helpful. Like I said, from my experience, I didn't have that background, and I definitely struggled because of it. It would have helped me out substantially if I had a good base doing help desk. It was one of the things I was after I ended up leaving that company. It's like, well, maybe I could go back to and look into something else. Maybe I'll go help desk. Maybe I'll try to do junior systems administrator kind of work, you know. And I think it helps out greatly. Now we also have a lot of, like you said, people coming out of degree programs, bachelors in cybersecurity, masters in cybersecurity, and they have no experience, and that's difficult because it's like, great, you have this cool degree, you might have a couple certs under your belt, but that's not real world applicable, which is unfortunate, and so they spent a whole bunch. I just spent 4 years in school learning about this IT thing and specifically security, and I can't get a job. Well, you can't just jump into it, head first.
Yeah, so
That's an interesting point.
Go ahead, Michael.
Well, I've talked to a lot of CISOs, and they've echoed the same thing. They've said, you know what, we get these kids out of school, and I apologize. I appreciate if you're 21, 22 years old, you don't want to be called a kid anymore, but you've completed your degree program. You're very excited. You've studied cybersecurity. You've read the case studies. You've done the casework, and you're really excited. And what I'm hearing is, and it's very much what you guys are saying, no actual hands-on keyboard experience, no practical experience, no ability to apply it, no ability to apply it under pressure. So my question then is, let's look at the other way. If you're watching this program today, and I know we have a lot of folks that pay attention that are in that situation, they're getting the degree program. Zach, what do they need to do so that when they're out, they can say, yes, look, I have a degree, but I've also done this and this and this, and this is why I'm a good candidate for you. Good question. How do we solve that on the other way?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I always look for, and I tell people, I try to help out with resumes when I can, is, hey, if you have a home lab set up where you tinker with things, let me know. What's your home network look like? What do you do? What's hands-on experience do you have? Do you go to any conventions? Do you go to meetups where you actually, put hands on keyboard and do things? Are you part of any groups? Like there's the local UW, University of Washington CTF group, Batman's Kitchen, or CCDC kind of things, where they actually do hands-on practical stuff. That's incredibly important. That looks way better than a cert, in my opinion.
I've told this story on the show in the past. I don't know if Zach or Michael has heard it. When I was applying for my second systems administrator job, which I was happened to be hired because I had some firewall experience and they were getting firewalls, but the Unix systems administrator team was interviewing me and asking me questions about what technologies that I knew. And I said, well, yeah, I know NFS. I said, I have that set up at home. They're like, wait, what do you mean you have that set up at home? What do you mean? I'm like, well, I have a lab at home. I have this, big server rack in my mom's living room. They're like, well, hold on. In your mom's living room, because I was living at home at the time, you've got a server rack extensive enough that you're running NFS between multiple systems. I'm like, yeah, you want to see a picture? And they just kind of look. So I pull out from my folder and I hand them a picture, and they're like studying the picture, recognizing like different pieces of hardware. And lo and behold, I got the job, and it was pivotal in my career that I held that position at the university where I was able to build a security program from the ground up. And that's one of the stories I tell to people that are looking to get into security, that those are the things, like Zach mentioned, participating in CCDC and having a home lab. I can speak from personal experience how greatly that has helped me in my career to achieve my goals.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's paramount, to be honest, because I look at a resume and say, okay, you have this language, you have this set of skills. Tell me how you use it practically. Like, do you have something at home? That's amazing. Tell me more about that. And, I ask people, okay, what's your home network look like? And people will go off on a diatribe for a long time, 10 minutes. And I'm trying to keep up taking notes. I'm like, this is amazing. Why didn't I ask this right off the bat?
Zach, technology questions aside, what questions do you ask candidates to gauge their aptitude towards being something like a penetration tester? And I don't know if I want. So I know someone that asked this specific question, and I tend to ask it as well. They will ask the person, okay, imagine this scenario. You're inside of a room, and there's a light bulb screwed in, and the light is on. Describe for me how many different ways you could turn the light off in the room. And when they get through 2 or 3 different things, you say, okay, keep going. Okay, keep going. And you just keep pushing them until they run out of ideas. I think ideally they should get to like 6 or 7 and start getting more creative. And I think that's a really valid test, especially for someone who's a penetration tester, because thinking creatively about how to solve a problem, and you're going to have to do that when you break into someone's network. Do you have questions? And I understand if you don't want to share them all on air because it kind of lets the cat out of the bag. Not that it's a secret, right? But it gives people a chance to think about them, which could be a good or a bad thing. But do you have questions like that?
Not exactly. I like to talk more about the person. I go for really hard on cultural fit too, but there's definitely values in those questions. I try to ask them, tell me about a tool that you used somehow it wasn't designed for. I don't care about what something does or what it's for. I care about what it can do. If I can weaponize something, that's awesome.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. How do you weaponize? Because that's certainly part of the candidates' skills that they have to have when they're going for pen testing. So that's great. Now, is it just penetration testing that you're hiring for, Zach, or are there other research roles? And how do you treat the different roles in terms of discovering the correct candidate?
Well, I mostly do the phone screens. So I say if a candidate's worthwhile moving on to a technical interview where they could get into the nitty gritty of things. So like I said, I do a lot of cultural fit. I try to see if they have a basis level, like we said earlier, if they understand what they're talking about to something we can use. And if they do, I move it on and say, hey, we have these directors of service that I would say, hey, this guy looks interesting. This person looks interesting. I think they might have a fit. What sort of work do we have available? Can I set you up for a phone call with this candidate? And the directors will go after and be like, yeah, actually, we do have work. That sounds good. Set me up with an interview. And they'll discuss, like I said, they'll get into the nitty gritty of things, what they do, what they can do, what they'd be useful for.
You said a word that really triggered a question, and that was culture. And I think a lot of founders of early stage startups, whether they're thinking about it or not consciously, they have an idea of what kind of culture they want to create and breed for their organization. How do you determine if someone is going to fit into the culture?
Yeah, that's a tough one, especially in this industry, in security specifically. I think one of the best ways I've heard it is one of my friends, they say they have a no asshole rule.
It's a good one. It's a good one.
I think so. I think it's really important. And I mean, there's people in security that talk a lot and they don't actually produce results. And so it's a different field. Like I said, the security is a little different than normal things. So being able to parse that out and figure out, hey, this guy is actually pretty cool. He just doesn't talk all the time and actually can do some amazing stuff. That's great. And so trying to figure that out, like I said, I do a lot of personal questions when I talk to candidates and make sure that they would be a good fit because I think that's incredibly important, almost equally as much as what they can do skill-wise.
How many people do you interview that you're like, oh my God, I could never put this person on site with a customer ever?
How about some of the people you interview too? I mean, it's going to be tough. I mean, having a bad interview sucks, right?
It does. No, you're absolutely right. It's a very similar kind of thing. Fortunately, we've been fortunate. I've interviewed hundreds of people in the effort of this show, and largely I've been blessed with awesome interviews. This one included. Oh,
yeah. But it's like pulling teeth sometimes, trying to get answers out of people. So, I mean, being friendly, having a good approach, trying to ask them easy questions to begin with to kind of warm people up, I think helps out a lot.
Good tip. Michael, more questions for Zach?
No, I've been kind of enjoying it, actually. I mean, I think, Zach, you're making fantastic points. It's kind of refreshing to see that. And I think less of a question, more of a point. Maybe we'll jump off from here. I think then that if you're in one of those situations today, take some notes from Zach and take a look at it, right? Because I think this is one of those things where it's an inefficiency. If you're trying to recruit for a position, you need to have a better sense of what you're looking for and have a process that you're able to follow. If you're trying to get a position, I mean, there's no reason to show up to a conversation with Zach and not be able to answer his questions, especially the simple ones, and be conversant and convince Zach that you've got value and that you should move forward. Zach, what do you think the biggest challenge is? Like when you think about recruiting, and as you've been looking at it, and you've gone to the conferences and you've tried to sift through the noise, and you've now looked at it from both sides, what do you think, like, categorically, what problem or problems do we need to think about to make this a little bit more efficient and a little bit better for everybody?
That's the ongoing challenge, to be honest. I'm still pretty new at this. I've been doing recruitment for about 6-ish months. I'm brand new. I'm still shiny at this, so I'm trying to figure that out, and I'm always up for people to help with it. So, like I said, I go out there. I try to be friendly. I try to not be the typical recruiter and forget people. It's tough because you got to deal with so many people. I ended up doing a few informational interviews with recruiters, and they're like, "You're that. Did you ever get that job with that thing?" And I'm like, "No, we had an informational interview about recruiting. I'm trying to be like you. I'm trying to do that job." Like, "Oh, what was your name again?" And it's tough. And so it's a lot of plate spinning.
You say that you have 6 months of experience with recruiting, and that's far more experience than I think most founders have in the interview process. There are probably many founders that have this vision, they're creating a company, and have never interviewed a candidate, or maybe throughout their career, they could count on one hand the number of times they've had to sit down with a potential candidate and conduct an interview. What tips do you have for those people who are creating a company? They're the founders of the company, but they're also responsible for hiring people, and they basically have no clue. Like, I realized I could probably count maybe on two hands the time I had to interview people. So I really had to think about my strategy and approach, and I still believe I have a lot to learn. So what tips do you have?
Yeah, that's tough. Interviewing and being interviewed is a skill set in itself, in my opinion. It's difficult to come up on the spot with questions and answers, I should say, when you're being interviewed. Being the interviewer is, as I said, also a skill set. Being able to talk to people, being able to warm them up, to be able to answer questions, to get them comfortable where they're not scared out of their minds. Is another issue that has to be addressed, because some people just have performance anxiety, and they might be incredibly intelligent and just freeze up when they get a question, and then as soon as you get out of an interview, I know I've done it, like, oh, I knew that, why couldn't I figure it out right then? So I like to make things a little bit more conversational personally. Like I said, I don't get into the really deep tech talk too much. So talk to other people that do interviews. Get some mentorship, again, very important. See if you can sit in on interviews. If you have friends that do conduct interviews often, reach out to them, ask them for help too. See what works well for them, what doesn't work. There's some pretty awful questions, and they definitely float around on Twitter and whatnot of what not to do. I try not to be one of those guys.
That is a great point. But I like what you said, that the best tip is to make the person feel comfortable in the first part of the interview, so that you get the actual results, right? Not and get past that kind of nervousness. I think that's some great advice. So what are questions not to ask?
Well, there's all the legalese questions where you're not allowed to ask, the HIPAA kind of questions where those are just illegal. So I found out where,
that's a great point. Yeah, if you haven't conducted
overseas, kind of weird. I get some really crazy resumes from people. So we're worldwide. We have people over in Spain, the UAE, all over. We have Central America, and so I'll get resumes, and people tell me what they, what their marital status. I got one that was single and looking, which was a little different. We're not allowed to ask those kind of questions. And I'm like, I was talking to my boss at the time, Christy, and I was like, Christy, why do they tell me this? And it's like, well, everywhere else in the world it's okay. Here in the States, it's illegal. Oh, that's interesting. So those are the ones I usually try to avoid talking about. You can't ask somebody if they have kids, if they have a family, what sort of family they have, which do come up in conversation, and they are very important points. But I can't ask directly about them, and I won't. So that is kind of a minefield at times, it seems like.
Yeah. Michael, I think you're muted or something. I see your mouth moving, but no words are coming out.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, you're welcome.
What questions? So I want to stay on that, but I want to nuance it a little bit differently. A lot of times we think, oh, I know the questions to ask. These are the questions that are going to get me the right candidates. So instead of asking about the illegalities or legalities or things like that, what's kind of surprised you in terms of not just approach, but actual a topic to talk about, or a question that either, wow, that totally gave me nothing, and you stopped asking it, or something that you found, maybe it came up in a conversation and you started to notice as a trend, and you're like, oh, I should talk about this. Maybe it's related to pen testing, maybe it's related to security, maybe it's not. But have you found something that's almost like in the last 6 months, a little bit of a trend, either in a positive or a negative? Because that stuff to me is always curious.
Well, one of my questions that I was started off asking is, tell me about yourself. And that one's tough because it puts people kind of on the spot. It's one of those kind of expected questions. You're looking, it's a normal question. But asking that right out of the bat, hey, I'm Zach, let's have this interview. Tell me about yourself. Let's get you talking right away. And people freeze up with that one a lot. I was shocked on that one, Tell me about yourself. Well, it's not super difficult, I would imagine. Tell me about your background, what you've done, where you've been, what the cool things you enjoy. But it's really tough because they don't know how to feel you out yet. That's like I said, that's why I like to warm people up. I tell them a little bit about my background, what I've done. I kind of start talking and lead the conversation into, this is what I've done. Tell me a little bit more about what you've done, and tell me a little bit more about this. And like I said, I get a resume, I look at it. They probably have some cool stuff. Not all resumes are great. Some people are very intelligent and they write a poor resume, and then I have to kind of say, okay, I see a couple of little gems in here. Let's try to dig those out and look into them a little bit more. Let's get them talking about things they're passionate about. And like I said, it's hard to stop that train once it gets going.
Michael, more questions for Zach? I mean, we could probably keep chatting for a while on it, but I've enjoyed it. I want to go back because you made the point. I just want to echo it. Being nice to people and putting them at ease is such a better strategy than I'm going to be a hard ass. I'm going to throw all this technical stuff at them. I'm going to try to trip them up. Because if you think about it, most people who are interviewing with you either really need the job or, they're interviewing. There's very few people. Zach, maybe your experience is different. I find when I'm involved in these processes, there's very few people who are just, I love everything I'm doing, but I'm just going to take the interview because it's good sport for me. There's usually something at stake. They're interested, they're nervous, they're anxious, and now you're going to grill them and ramp that up.
It's counterproductive.
Oh, well, they want to work there. Yeah.
Yeah,
I enjoyed that. Like as I've been listening to you, I've nodded my head to a lot of it, but that's the one that I went, oh man, I have seen so many people that to them it's blood sport.
It's like a murder board, right?
I've got these questions. I am ready. Let's see how they do. They think they're good. Well, if they want to work here, wow, holy crap, dude, I don't want to work there. Stop.
That's red flags to me right there. If I get any of that sense from somebody, man, I'm out. I don't want to work for a place that's going to try to get me.
Yeah,
that sounds awful.
So all right. So on that front, though, you've already mentioned, right? So you're nice to people. You try to put them at ease. You get them to talk about themselves, which it doesn't seem like it'd be a challenge. It's a challenge. There's a lot of reasons why. But you also said at one point you're big on cultural fit and making sure somebody's going to fit. So how do you assess that?
That's a good question. That's a tough one too. When I get people kind of talking about themselves, again, this is where the social engineering kind of gets going. People love to talk about themselves, and they are very, like I said, some people are better at it than others, and some people just go off on tirades about cool things they've done, and I did this. Negative kind of verbiage and whatnot, wordage is really paramount, I think, when it comes to people talking about what they've done. Talking negatively about various things that they've, like previous companies, kind of a warning side to me. If they're infallible, that's also a little bit of a worry. Oh, well, I would have done this if it wasn't for this guy holding me back or some such, as an example. That's one of the things I look about. Are they positive? Do they have, good energy, for lack of a better phrase? Are they enjoyable to talk to? Do I think they could get along with other people easily? And that's part of what I asked, what cons do you go to? What sort of social engagements do you do to see if you are friendly out there? Most of the time we get referrals from people. I'm going to go to the referrals. Hey, what do you think about so-and-so? Tell me a little bit more about them. Get a little bit more background on them. So.
No, it's all good points. I particularly like the fact where you sit someone down for an interview and you walk away that you're like, did I enjoy talking to that person? That speaks volumes to cultural fit, right? Like that's a good indicator. Well, Zach, thank you so much for appearing on Startup Security Weekly. It was wonderful having you and talk about how companies in all stages, startup or otherwise, can improve their recruiting process. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. It was great talking to you guys.
With that, we're going to take a short break, come back, and talk about some startup articles for discussion on the topics of leadership, innovation, and startup success. Stay tuned. Do you have a website, an external presence, employees, an office? Any of these things can be compromised and attacked. How are you defending these assets? Have you penetration tested these public assets? Start 2017 by taking a proactive approach to securing your vulnerable areas. Black Hills Information Security has been helping companies find their weaknesses since 2008. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com and see how they can help you sleep better at night. Oh, welcome back, everyone, to Startup Security Weekly. I want to remind everyone that the hot seat will be hot. It'll be so hot, it'll be on fire. And Chris Martin is going to be on fire from Logarithm when he's coming on to talk about security, intelligence, and all of the wonderful things about Logarithm. SecurityWeekly.com/Logarithm. Make sure you go there, because the problem that we're trying to solve is that the security community struggles to understand what those vendors are doing in security vendor land. And if you want to know and you want to find out and have myself and others be your coach and your guide on this journey to understanding how vendors can actually solve your problems, visit securityweekly.com/Logarithm and check them out. You will be pleasantly surprised, perhaps, as to how Logarithm has grown and matured as a company to help you solve not just one problem, but multiple problems. So I'm excited about this webcast. That's December 13th from 3 to 4 Eastern Time. Michael, what do we got this week? Oh, wait.
We start out.
We got another announcement is what we got.
I love it.
So if you're interviewing a candidate and you're asking that candidate, how in the world do you keep up with all of these things in security? If they say, I have an itpro.tv subscription, you should hire that person immediately on the spot, because itpro.tv is awesome. And if you're an employer and you want to hire people and then you want to have them acquire skills, you can buy a supervisor portal subscription. So as new employees come on board, you can say, hey, every employee that comes on board for this role has to take these training modules, and you can track their progress through the system, which is great. Because what is the old adage? What if we don't train our employees? Or what if we train our employees?
People say what, and they leave.
And they leave.
And the flip is, what if you don't and they stay?
And they stay. So you should always train your employees, and you can do that so easily with itpro TV. itpro TV/startup security. There is a discount code for the individual subscription, SS30. Try it free for 7 days. Get 30% off your monthly subscription. Alrighty, Michael. Now, what do we have?
I feel like I didn't do this intentionally, but I feel like the story selection this week is all about brain science. So this first one, it was an Accenture CEO turned a failing leadership into growth. I don't like it as a headline, but I happened to get through it. And what I thought was really interesting was he said, look, I'm the CEO. I got 100,000 people. And I came in and I said, I'm going to over deliver. We're going to make it profitable. We're going to crush it. He's like, yeah, so totally didn't do that. And I had a completely negative impact. Now, I want to point that out. When we talk about value prop on this program, it's what problem do you solve, what value do you create, and what is the impact. We always overlook that impact, but that impact is friction. And he's basically saying, I did it. I burned out my people. I blew trust. We didn't make money. We lost value, right? That's why impact matters. Now, it's because it was a negative impact. But here's the stuff that I really liked. And he talked about the science of inspiring people. So first thing he said was, I realized it just came down to I didn't really need to worry about what the executives, right? The rest, I mean, he's the CEO. What the other executives said, what the board said. What I needed to do was get right with my people and get right with my clients, my customers. And if I could do those two things, everything else would work out. I tend to agree with him. But
I like that.
He had 4 things here, and I'm going to read these. I wasn't sure, but I think it's important enough. When you give someone a pat on the back, so he's got 4 things he pointed out: neuroscience in the brain, right? It's all about the way that our brain and our bodies emit different chemicals. When you give someone a pat on the back, when you give them a raise, when you otherwise show your appreciation, their brain releases dopamine and they feel excited and engaged. Dopamine, by the way, is absolutely essential to so much in life. Number 2, when we're made to feel defensive, our brains release adrenaline and cortisol. Adrenaline compels us to quickly make the fight or flight decision. Cortisol is also released and will shut down the parts of your body that are not required for survival mode. This impedes inspiration and creativity. For what it's worth, it also screws up your digestion. It screws up your ability to sleep. It messes with your blood pressure. It increases your waistline. It does all sorts of really bad, negative things. Now, I'm going to stop there for a second. This is what a lot of us in security are dealing with right now. And remember Awake Security, Paul, when he came on and he said, look, people describe their jobs as I'm under the gun. I don't like it. I'm tired all the time. And we've created this culture in security where we're quick to tell everybody what's wrong. And they're quick to tell us every time we screw up. We got to break that cycle because we're putting everybody into this fight or flight. You're constant. There's a concept called adrenal fatigue. Some people believe it medically. It's some people are like, I don't know. I can tell you what. I'm a believer in it. All right, keep going. Number 3, when we have positive social interactions, a good meeting, you're socializing, you get to know people outside of work. This is what we're just talking about with Zach. You like the people, you release oxytocin. Oxytocin is often called the love chemical, but it doesn't have to be. That creates this good feeling, right? So when you can create oxytocin, you feel good. You feel a sense of connectedness.
Is that what Matt Lauer was trying to create in the workplace, or is that different?
He might have wanted more oxytocin. Well, it's funny too. One of the things that they'll tell you, for example, to create oxytocin, and we would say this is probably not a workplace suggestion, especially I think Matt Lauer would prove this. Hugs, but the hug needs to last, I think it's 8 seconds to actually allow the neurotransmitters to release oxytocin or something like that. So if you're going to hug your kids or someone in your life, hug a little longer and you'll get that oxytocin.
What if it's like a Dave Kennedy 4-minute hug? Does that release more of the? I'm
thinking you've got so much oxytocin. This is why we trust. Listen, when you get that much, you listen, you empathize, and you get better trust. So I think Dave's onto something.
He is. He just wants me to trust him enough so he can kiss me and stuff. Usually is how Dave rolls.
Yeah. It's funny. That's not even listed on this list. I'm surprised by that. And then it talks about collaborating. When you collaborate, you release serotonin. And when you have high serotonin, you're calm and you're more energized. So when you look at meditation and stuff like that, you want a good supply of dopamine. You want a good supply of serotonin. You'd like a good supply of oxytocin. Those are the things. So when we go look at high performance teams, we talk about the need for trust, the need for some level of safety, the need for a feeling of connectedness and a feeling of belonging. You want people that are calm. You want people that are centered and focused. And so basically what this says, and he goes on.
Hold on. Basically is what this is saying is to have a positive workplace, you can shortcut it by giving all of your employees cocaine and marijuana.
I was going to say there are probably solutions to this chemically that would be a little bit different. But
I think that mixture covers all the bases here. Is my point.
Yeah, and it's only legal in some states, so it's just something to think about there. But here's the one I'm going to come back to, though. Go look at that second point again. When you're under the gun, when you're feeling defensive, when you're stressed out all the time, you're running on adrenaline and cortisol. And I'm going to add in either Red Bull or Mountain Dew and cigarettes. And so, but that's so destructive. And what happens instead is if you understand these basics, you can get so much further. And he goes on, he gives this example of a clock. Okay, cool, whatever. But it's a cycle, I think is the better way to look at it. And as you start focusing on these things and you make people feel included and you thank them, it's got to be genuine, right? We can tell if someone's just BSing us. But I liked it. I thought this was a really interesting way to look at it. And to be fair, I'd never really stopped long enough to look at what chemicals are released at which of these stages and hadn't considered it in a work perspective. And I thought that was pretty important.
Also, there's a picture on this post on the right-hand side on the thing. In one of the pictures, looks like Tom Brady on speed. I'm just saying. I just happened to notice that.
All right, I gotta go find it because that's kind of funny. All right, now here's this other one. What do you think of arguments? Do you like arguing? Are you an arguer, Paul?
I'm not. I hate arguing with people.
I'm not either. Yeah, I don't enjoy it.
Some
much
people
either.
really. Well, I think we call them attorneys. They really like arguing.
That's a great point. So here's what I put in. There's a phrase in here that I actually really liked, and so I threw this in there. I'll quote from it: "Arguing with someone to prove your point simply proves that you lack the communication skills to help someone else see things your way willingly." Yep, I love that. That's a great way to look at it. What's interesting is in a straight talk framework, when we look at the rounds, first thing you do is you go through a discovery round. Then you move to where you distill down to what's valuable. It's not a consensus, but you're distilling down through a series of mechanisms to get to what's valuable. The third round is the dialogue round. It's not a discussion or a debate, and that's for a reason. When you discuss something, when you debate it, you're trying to win. I'm trying to show you that I'm right and you're wrong. When you have a dialogues are about understanding, and that's this point. You can't win an argument. If you're going to go out at all costs to prove that you're right, you're typically going to piss somebody off. In fact, you shared a great video with me yesterday on Facebook.
Oh, yeah.
From a TED Talk, all about how to have conversations. And she started with, okay, how many of you unfriended somebody on Facebook because you didn't like a political post or because you didn't like this or they said this or they offended you here? She's like, yeah, why? Why is that bothering people these days? But what I've noticed when you look at it, especially I've been stepping away from this stuff. I don't know if I've said it on this program. I've been on something of a media fast. I still get the Wall Street Journal. I like their business and their tech coverage. I don't watch the news. I don't watch the headlines. I took the news apps off my mobile devices. I don't want to say I don't care because I care, but I don't care to get caught up in all of it. Things are going to happen that I can't influence. I've been investing the time in the business. I've been investing the time in myself. I've been investing the time in the kids. Such a better payoff. So then I can go back and look at some of these things. Paul, it's amazing how people are so desperate to register those wins. But think about it. What are they getting with each of those wins? They're getting a hit of serotonin, or they're getting that rush of adrenaline, or whatever else. And when we can start realizing that, we can fight those particular needs. A couple things that he suggests, and I suggest as well. Listen carefully, speak purposefully. She talks about this as well in that video that you shared, that TED Talk, where it was, put the mobile phone down. Yeah, but here's the other thing when you're listening to somebody. I've said this a lot. We don't listen with the intent to listen. It's two things. We're so afraid of silence that we get uncomfortable when there's a pause because we're processing. We need to get comfortable with the pause. But also, a lot of us, we're not listening for anything other than when do they stop long enough for me to say my next brilliant thing?
Yeah.
And if you can change that, if you can listen just to listen.
It's not about you. Hey, have you ever watched Inside the Actor Studio?
I have.
Yeah. I can't remember the host's name, but if you just watched, what's his name?
James Lipton.
James Lipton. When you watch those interviews, do you learn anything about James Lipton?
Nope.
Nothing. Right, because he doesn't talk about himself because it's not the point. He's interviewing the person, and that's one of the key points that I've learned over the years about interviewing. And it's hard not to talk about yourself. Now, his interviews are a little more formal. We can give examples and tell a little story from our experience to help fuel the conversation, as we just did with Zach, which was more of a discussion, I think, than a straight up interview, right? But I think that's an important point of listening. Is you're listening so much that you're asking insightful questions in a series and not listening to what they say and then repeating back something from your own experience. If you're going to repeat something back, explain to them what they just said in your own words to reaffirm what they said.
Yeah. Or, what I love to do is to say, I call it story swapping. Oh, is it like? Because then you'll get into more context and detail to it. But that, yeah. And what's interesting in that TED Talk, you know what? We'll have to go find it and throw it in here.
Yeah, I really liked it. There were some things that, like, good. Consciously I would do in my interviews over the past 13 years. Subconsciously I would do, and then areas where I'm like, I can get better at these things. They were roughly broken up into about 33% for me when I watched it. So I thought it was a great resource.
No, and I appreciated you pointing out to me. The other part of listening carefully then is to speak purposefully. I maybe massage that language a little bit, but the idea to it is don't say things for the sake of saying things. it's the delivery of, oh, well, I said it. I mean, if they didn't understand it, well, think through what you're going to say before you say it.
That's what I love about James Lipton is when he asks a question, it's very short and very pointed. He doesn't go off in this
very
long,
thought out.
Yeah, and he doesn't go off in this long diatribe to get to his question. He's very pointed with his questions, and I think that's
I feel
important.
really self-conscious today, Paul.
Yeah.
Well, you know what I find a lot of times is that, like, it's when you're forming the question, it's the brain kind of runs, and then you're like, oh, I can ask it simpler. What I've always been impressed with James Lipton, in fact, if you've ever paid attention, I think it was maybe Nicole Kidman and there was somebody else. They were like, they stuffed like, wow, you did your prep. Like you like, and he did, and he has, and he's got some really good insights. And it's, I think there's a lot there to learn. Last little bit, leave the snide comments out, leave the passive aggressive approaches out, take the cheap shots out of it. By the way, if you're writing these days, yeah, same advice. I can't tell you how many times, Paul, you and I talked about this on Enterprise Security Weekly on Wednesday. Like, I don't want to reference like root passwords or anything, but goodness gracious, people leave the passive aggressive snide comments out of stuff. And if you're trying to have an honest dialogue with somebody, that doesn't help. The ad hominem attacks, like attacking the person, oh, you won't understand anyway. Oh, you're too dumb. Well, you don't agree with me. Well, then what's wrong with you? That doesn't get anybody anywhere. I don't like it. So leave it out. Don't do it. Talk straight. Unless
you can pick on something or someone else that you have in common that you don't like.
That might be a way to build some oxytocin. You got your big bonding moment over someone. But
seriously, if the person's complaining or pointing out a problem with something or someone else, if you make a snide comment along those lines, that tends to validate their position in it.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I'm not myself fantastic at this. Sarcasm is fun. So
yeah, I try and work sarcasm into our interviews, for example, and some of the content in the show. And mostly it's not picking on an individual, right? Mostly it's picking on an Apple, a Google, or a Microsoft or something like that. The easy targets.
They have feelings.
They have feelings too. Google's not evil. I know they had that whole campaign.
All right, word of mouth. So it's another science one, but I really enjoyed this one. I would have to go pull up the studies, but any time over the last 15 years or so that I've looked at studies on how do we make decisions. So this is going to be important whether you're a CISO, whether you're part of an enterprise security team, you're a vendor, you're a startup. Word of mouth is almost number one. Number two is I saw you at a trade show. I saw, maybe I think a third place now is webinar. Saw you at a webinar. But that word of mouth is absolutely so important. So somebody said, well, let's go figure out why. Like, let's go understand why. Now, here's the thing. If you're a security team, why does it matter? Well, it matters because if you want to go get the right solutions and you want to pay attention to the right startups, obviously watching us is a great strategy, but it's paying attention to who's giving you those insights is great. But also, what do people say about your team? I've been working, Paul, with a lot of security teams lately that they want what we've called influence without authority. You want the other teams to say, hey, security people, come to the beginning of the project. I don't want to dump it on your lap last minute, right? We want to get out of that reactive cycle where it's all adrenaline and cortisol, and we want to get to the point where we've got some oxytocin and serotonin and some dopamine, and we're all feeling good. Well, part of the way that you do that is that word of mouth. If people are excited about the experience that they've had with you and you've helped them solve problems and get where they wanted to go better, faster, they're more likely to come to you. So, okay, how does that work? And really what it comes down to is that there's two interesting things to this that I drew out of it. People's consumption of behavior can be motivated by a desire to offset threats to their sense of self. And that need for control can lead people to shift from sharing opinions to giving advice. I think that's the key thing to focus on, at least as I read this. And there's a lot there to read. This was a good read. This was one of those things I flagged, Paul. I'm going to go back and reread again. But why? Why do I not want to hurt myself? Well, part of my consumption behavior is let me state this differently. No one ever got fired for buying Cisco or IBM or something else. So if a bunch of other CISOs said, oh, I really like this technology, it's working great for me, then I have less risk to myself. So therefore, I think it's kind of interesting. So that's why word of mouth works, because there's a collective nature to it. But people who don't feel control, people who don't feel that they're in control, people who feel marginalized, I'm not going to offer you then my opinion. I'm going to tell you what you need to do. I'm going to assert that control back. Here's why that matters in my take. But maybe you see it differently, Paul. If you ask someone for an opinion and they're able to say, well, here's my situation, right? So they're giving you the context. Here's some of the things I considered. I went with this. This is why it worked for me. I'm not sure it'll work for you, but if you got any questions, let me know. I find that kind of stuff is really helpful. When the person crosses over and says, let me tell you how you're going to do it. You're going to go do this. They're the best. I checked everybody else out. They all suck. This one's the good one. And if you're smart and you seem like a smart person, you'll do what I say. Those are the ones where you should probably say, not sure that's exactly the advice I want. You can be polite and cordial and thank them. But in the back of your head, that's the word of mouth recommendation. Probably not so much. And then you can audit yourself. Are you giving people an opinion with context, or are you telling them what to do because you yourself feel a little bit out of control? What do you think, Paul?
I got stuck on the no one's ever gotten fired for buying IBM or Cisco. I think, as I've always heard that phrase, and I believe it's kind of false today. And it depends on how you slice it. I think very few people have gotten fired because they chose to purchase IBM. I think lots of people have probably gotten fired for other things that may have surrounded the project that implemented that technology, such as it wasn't the right technology fit, or the implementation was poor, or poor communication to all of the different teams, or just laziness in execution. I don't know. I think that's a fallacy, to be honest with you.
I think it's both. I think that the reason incumbent companies and large companies tend to do well is because they've got that track record, and because a lot of other people have done it, so there's less risk in you doing it. Now, has anybody gotten fired for it? Sure, of course they have, and probably for a variety of reasons. But what I realized looking at this was, if I don't want to put myself at risk, let's go deeper, because we've talked about this a lot. Right. And we did a whole episode on de-risking yourself as a startup, or de-risking your actions, even if you're part of a team. There's a risk to the individual person who's either going to go strongly endorse you and recommend you, or the person who's actually signing the purchase order. Now, there might be a financial risk. There might be a personal risk. There might be a career risk. Excuse me. If you can figure out that risk and you can address that successfully, you are going to be better off. Word of mouth works because if the people are just like them, and they've already been through some level of that, then what's happening that we don't always pay attention to is there's an internal assessment that says, okay, they're like me. They took this action. They didn't get fired, and they didn't come into any personal harm. Okay, I like it too. So it's just worth paying attention to on both sides of it. Word of mouth is going to continue to be important to us. Now, they did go deeper into this, by the way. They looked at things like Yelp and online reviews and everything else. And the bottom line conclusion here was, I'm paraphrasing, but it was, I'm still going to ask the people closest to me for their advice and insights, but I'm going to continually draw on an increasingly broader spectrum of things. And I think you and I've talked before, Amazon is me, like if I buy anything, I go read the reviews on Amazon. And to be fair, most times I'm just going to purchase it from Amazon, but I read the reviews, and I love reading the negative reviews. And I'm always amazed when it's like 1 star, it showed up a day late, screw them, I hate this company and everything about it. I'm sorry, what would it have to do with the product? Like, what? But, I'll read the reviews. I'm really curious about what other people think. And then I'm always myself trying to put it into some sort of a context to figure out, does that matter to me or not? And I've found in years past, I've spent way too much time reading the comments and overanalyzing it. So I've tried to speed up that process a little bit, which I guess sets us up to, how do you turn your insight into execution? So here's the challenge. You get the team together, Paul, and everybody's excited. We got all these ideas. We throw them all over the whiteboard. Yeah, rah, rah. How do we move that from, I love it, we should totally do that, to actually doing it? This is going to surprise you, but here's some more brain science for you. New insights are fragile. What this means, and it's interesting, if you've ever done yoga or meditation, or you've studied any of these things, they'll always talk about forging a new groove or working the new groove. So if you're trying to learn some sort of a new exercise, you've got to do it, and you've got to work through that uncomfortable period until it becomes natural. Right? And there's a lot of science around how that works. But the bottom line is, even when you see something and you're really excited about it and everybody sounds good, you're having a total oxytocin moment and everybody's feeling great. Yeah, but then you get back on Monday. Well, the old patterns take over, not the new patterns. So how do you get to this new pattern? You've got to keep reactivating it. You've got to keep getting people excited about this concept. All right, and I'm going to say small bets until it becomes a more established groove. Of course, you've got to realize that everybody's overcome with noise. We're like I like to say, we're starving for knowledge, but drowning in information. We don't have an information problem. And I said somebody pointed out something interesting the other day. I can't remember where I came across it. It was either a discussion or something, and they were pointing out how this existed 200, 300 years ago. We have never in history not had a time, modern history, where we weren't inundated with some sort of information or the gossip of the day. Is it more now? Absolutely. It's proliferated, but it's always been an interesting challenge. And if you can steel yourself from it, if you can move away from it, right, like my media fast and stuff, I think you get to a lot better. So they said, here's 4 habits. Here's 4 things you can do, you can develop. First thing is document stuff in real time. I'll tell you, I'm becoming more and more, this is becoming more and more important to me. Those of you that have done this, whiteboards are awesome. I'm really enjoying some of the new tablet experiences that you can have. But the idea is bring people together and solidify it while you're doing it. Don't have the meeting and then say, okay, someone write that up. Write it up as you're going. Document it, whether it's mind mapping or just writing on the whiteboard and snapping pictures or whatever. Do it, get it visual, get people involved in the process. Mm-hmm. Paul, I mean, you and I did that when we were in your office a couple weeks ago.
There's something on my whiteboard. Before I leave today, there's something on my whiteboard that we need to discuss as a team and take pictures of. Yep.
All right. Second thing, manage your attention ruthlessly. This is something I'm putting a lot of my own focus on right now. I added the word ruthlessly. The article was a little bit kinder about it, but we only have so many hours in a day. We only have so much attention. There's only so many things we can do. So you can go play around on social media or, check out cat pictures, or you can focus on this one thing. And as I've been talking to more and more people about it, what's cool is you can just do this thing for, 5, 10 minutes, 25 minutes. I've got a concept I'm working on. When I get it a little bit better, I'll try to share it. But I was realizing some pieces about this yesterday that I can actually break it into like 3 8-minute segments a day. And keep it moving. But you've got to be really keen on that. Like, this is what's important to me today, and this is what I'm going to do. When you go look at it, right, the Stoics were good at doing this. Marshall Goldsmith wrote a book called Triggers, which I really enjoyed. And he talks about asking yourself questions. At the end of the day, right, what was important to you? Did you do stuff? So at the end of the literal day, one of his examples is, I paid someone to call me every night at the set time and ask me my list of questions. And his list of questions, if I'm remembering correctly, was like 20, 25 questions long. But, did you write in your journal today? Did you do this today? Did you do this today? And those are those reminders. That's activating and reactivating those pieces to it, which feeds into that next part. Questions reactivate those aha moments, those insights, those things that sparked people and got them excited. You got to keep reactivating. How do you reactivate them? You ask questions. Everybody knows I love the questions, so it's not a surprise. And then the last part was notice the deadlines. So a lot of times we'll set a deadline, and then the deadline comes and goes, and nothing happens because, everybody's busy. They said, no, you can't do that. Notice the deadlines, honor the deadlines, and pay attention to them when they show up. I thought it was good advice, and I think it's an important thing because...
I think a lot of it is project management 101, and I think it really, with the articles, what I took away from it was have goals and priorities. And those are going to change. Realize that no one can accurately predict the future 100% of the time. But when you do that brainstorming session, as I'm known as the salad shooter, I've learned that we need to develop goals from those, right? And then develop the priorities and try to understand what the dependencies are in the order. That's part of priorities so that you can go to execution. And that's how I've had some good success, I think. With especially some recent projects, is I didn't just like wake up one day and learn all that. It's been a learning experience over time. And listen, you don't always get it right. You got to be comfortable with that too. I mean, we just mostly the staff here spent most of the day yesterday reconstructing some things in the studio after we completed a big project because we're like, oh, this probably should have been step 2 rather than step 7. But it has such an impact on our goals that we need to do it now, even if steps 8 and 9 are going to be delayed even more. So I think that's what this article really boils down to for me.
I liked it. It was good. Last piece, It's from the folks at 37 Signals. How to avoid the yes dilemma that can kill your business. I'll hit this one really quick. A lot of times you got an idea, it's a good idea, and instead of then coming up to the next idea and saying, okay, do we continue? Do we do this? Right? They call it the what do they call it? The also or. Do I also do this, or do I only do this? They said, a lot of times you get an idea. It's a good idea. It's kind of simple. Then you complexify it. And then you complexify it more. And the next thing you know, you got a collection of good ideas that add up to one big bad idea. And you've got to go through that. And what I really liked about it was if you force that trade-off, every time you get to this, should we do this? And you really sit down and catalog it and look at the value of it, then you have to make a decision. And if you're making a decision based on the value of something, well, Paul, we're back to being able to do the value prop. If you can answer the question, the problem you're trying to solve, if or how it creates value and its overall impact. So, for example, their example, oddly enough, was we had a podcast that was doing really well, and we wanted to do this other podcast. So our decision was, do we do both, or do we just do one and end the current one to start the new one? And in their decision was end the old one, start the new one. Cool. Other people don't. I mean, we've successfully added shows to the network and to the platform that you've built, and I'm excited about that. And it fits in what you have with the crew and the production and everything else, and it meets the needs of the community. People who are a little bit more limited, though, have this tendency to just keep doing stuff and saying yes to everything, and they get overrun, and then everything just kind of gets stymied and gunked up in the works.
Yep. All right. Lots of startup and security news.
Yeah. Now this is too, and this is why I what we look at on this program, right? So our goal here is to improve the security of business by exploring the business of security. We talked about some of these on the Enterprise Security Weekly show on Wednesday. So if these are things you're interested in the enterprise, you haven't seen that show, go take a listen, because I thought Paul had some really great insights on this.
Thank you.
And we'll go over some of them here quick, especially the ones that I can remember. So let's talk first. McAfee acquired SkyHigh. Now, we didn't get a lot into the details. It's undisclosed, which I think is interesting. SkyHigh raised $106.5 million, 4 rounds since 2012. It's a pretty impressive raise. Last was $40 million Series D, September 2016. So that's good, right? Series D's growth mode, that's about where they should have been. The revenue was estimated roughly to be $45 million. Take that with a big grain of salt. I think this is kind of interesting because it's showing us the solidification of the CASB space, the importance of it, but it's also showing us that for as many vendors as there were, things are going to start to solidify now. How did you take that?
I look at these numbers, Michael, and I think they had probably just enough sales to justify their raise and justify their exit to McAfee. In other words, McAfee said, we can make money with this. So it's funny because we don't know what the actual buyout was, but if they've done roughly $45 million in sales, they're roughly $150 million in funding. McAfee likely saw some growth potential beyond that. In other words, they are crossing the chasm, right? And they can see a real potential for growth to recoup all of that investment and make money. So, although if it was undisclosed, who knows? But I really think that McAfee bought them because they think they can make money with it in a new market space, and really seems some further accelerated growth in that area.
Yeah, I mean, you and I talked recently about how, okay, so what's McAfee going to do? They've got this private equity money, and where are they going to go with it? And boom, there you go. So we're starting to see some movement on it, and I think it's interesting. Now, what's also interesting is McAfee, one of the major investors is Thoma Bravo, and also in the news this week, Barracuda was acquired for $1.6 billion. So about 4 years ago, Barracuda spun out and went public. I forgot all the numbers. I threw it out. It's in the VentureBeat article in terms of how much they raised at the time and whatnot. Now, when you and I looked at this on Wednesday, what we thought was kind of interesting was twofold. First, they're doing some interesting things that you and I hadn't paid attention to, which I think is interesting because we cover a lot of this stuff. So here they are 4 years later, they're going public. They're going private again. Depending on how you're looking at it, the investors got a pretty good bump out of it, somewhere between 10 to 22% over what it's been trading at. So that's not bad in order to take it private again. But there was a line in the bottom of the article, Paul, that basically said, yeah, based on everybody else in the industry, they're just not performing that well as a public company. So this is awesome for them to go private again, and now they can get things done. Now, to be fair, when you're a public company, you do have a lot of scrutiny. And one of the things that we've looked at is a lot of times when you're a public company, you don't do as much R&D, you don't do as much growth, you don't do as much expansion.
Right.
It definitely seems like Barracuda, though, has positioned themselves really well, and I'll be really curious to see how that works out. But what always goes on in the back of my head, and I have absolutely no connections here or no inside knowledge, but this is also, so Thoma Bravo is the one who put up the money and brought them back. And so there's an article about all the stuff Thoma Bravo's in. And you and I talked about this a little bit on Wednesday. There's a lot of security companies in there. And if they're using McAfee as a major engine, I mean, Barracuda is its own brand. It stands alone. So it's just, I'm always curious to say, where are you guys going to go with this? Like, what's the play? Like, where's it going to go? But it's, I think it's interesting to pay attention to. And I think it's going to be interesting to pay attention to now as well, because as a private company, let's go see what they do for growth. Let's go see who they're targeting, who they go after, and how they're essentially going to reintroduce themselves to the marketplace.
I think it's interesting to see what they're going to do with R&D and maybe upsell their existing customers. I mean, if they're a 1.6 billion buyout, they likely have a pretty large customer base. And when you're a public company, you're not dumping a ton of money into R&D because you have to hit the bottom line. So I think going private allows them to funnel some money into R&D to come up with new products that they can make a lot of money on with their existing customer base easily, and then expand their customer base, would be my guess.
Yeah, and look, that's going to match, right? The PE hold times are up. So private equity typically, like, they love these big billion-dollar deals, and you'll see on average, and like I said, the numbers are going up. They'll hold a company 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And then they'll exit it, but they'll exit it much higher. Like it's they bought in for 1.6, they'll exit 3, 4, $5 billion. So it'll be curious to see how that plays out. But I think it's good. Like I take this as a good sign, and I'm going to be paying more attention to them. I'll see where they go. Pwnie Express, $8 million. Now I couldn't tell. I read one account. This was a Series C raise. Another said it was an equity raise. It was existing investors all came in for this particular thing. So they've raised about $26 million in three rounds since 2013, and they named a new CEO. I know they're sponsors, they're friends of the show. I know that you guys have done a lot of stuff. I mean, this feels like a great congratulations. What are your thoughts on this, Paul?
Oh, I think it's great for Pwnie Express. I'm not sure what has been told to me in confidence and what I can say publicly.
Yeah, and I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah, so. they are a sponsor, but I can say that we've worked with Pwnie Express for quite some time. In fact, when they debuted with their pen tester product and I used it as a pen tester, I was super impressed. And from that point, worked to get them as a sponsor. And they did become a sponsor, and we love working with them. So,
well, you know what I like too? I feel like in one of the shows you and I have done somewhere in the last 2 or 3 weeks, you made a comment about Pwnie Express, and we talked about somebody going after IoT, and you said, yeah, but they're not like Pwnie Express. They're really doing it. And so I think this raise, whether it's a Series C or an equity, is great. And if you read the press release on it, not only are they naming the new CEO, but they said, look, this is going to give us growth. Great. So if they're at a Series C, whether it's equity or Series C, that's about the stage they're at, and they're saying this money is going to let us fuel our growth, they're right on track. Like, based on the numbers and everything we'd expect to see, that's pretty exciting.
The success stories, I'm sorry, the success I like with Pwnie Express, and again, they're a sponsor, is that a lot of vendors will tout visibility, and that's one thing. What Pwnie allows you to do, and they've got some great case studies, such as with the NFL, is they allow you to identify what's yours as an organization and what falls outside of that, and very, very distinctly make that delineation so that you can identify threats. And that's what I think really separates out Pwnie from some of the other vendors. Again, I'm biased because they are a longstanding sponsor, but.
Yeah, but let me just comment on that, because you and I have been working together for a while now. But one of the things that consistently impresses me is that somebody's not a sponsor on the program because they wrote a check. If somebody's a sponsor, right? And in fact, I'm much more in favor of saying a partner of the effort to bring forth this type of programming and to both advance the industry and the community. That's because they've talked to you and they've talked to the other hosts and people that you trust, and they're impressive. I haven't come across anybody who's been on this network that I'm like, what were you thinking, Paul?
Right.
And so, take a moment, Paul, and realize that you've done a huge service for the industry and a big service for the community, because you're spending time and effort looking at people, and you're not just trying to turn a buck. You're interested in working with people that are making a difference.
And you are too, because Michael, I know you're busy, but you need to spend an hour with this sponsor and just make sure that you're as impressed as I am, just to be sure. So that's kind of how some of the validation process works around here, a little behind the scenes.
Well, I'll just leave it this part. It's always fun when Paul and I, and it was such a blast being in the same room on some of these calls together, because we can like give each other hand signals, and like you're watching our eyes get wider, and like, okay, yeah, and this question, and what about this, and how about, and it's like, wow, and we get done. It's there's a real passion to this stuff. All right, $25 million Series A. That's a huge number, and I didn't get a chance to do any background on this. ReversingLabs. So what's interesting, and I'm a straight talker. It's the most interesting thing, Paul. If you haven't looked at their website, go to their website. The landing page is all an ode to, hey, we raised $25 million. You scroll down, by the way, we're really excited. We just raised $25 million. Also, we just raised 20. I was like, wow. But what do? You get down a little bit. It says they do advanced threat hunting and analysis, elastic file analysis, malware hunting, and reputation services. That doesn't match what they do in Owler. So, Paul?
So ReversingLabs is kind of the back end company to a lot of the more public facing companies. Basically, if you want to identify a file or process as malicious, you can hook up with ReversingLabs and you can send them data, and they'll send it back to you and tell you whether it's bad or not. They're kind of like the back-end provider to a lot of security vendors today. I'm being careful not to give too much away. People could probably read between the lines, but I have had experience with ReversingLabs and been very impressed with their services and their products, which are really geared not necessarily to the enterprise, although with their Series B, they probably will start making a play into the enterprise, would be my guess. But largely, they've been a back-end provider for many security vendors.
Okay, so you're not surprised by this raise?
Not at all. Not at all. No, right. Because it's
a big number, but they've been around for so long. So you're right. So for them now to step into that space, and they're going to go to an already crowded market, they've got to go in guns blazing, big dollars, and shake it up a little bit. So a $25 million Series A, they're going to scale up fast and go after it. So this is almost like a B. Well, all right, it's an A rate, but it's big. But despite my being a little bit thrown at their website, you're kind of impressed with what they're able to do.
Yeah, because I have experience with ReversingLabs. All positive.
Well, I was hoping that you would. Last bit, this just came across today, so I threw it up there because we've been asked to try to take a look at some more global stuff, which we're happy to do. And those of you who gave us suggestions on Twitter, we've filtered them to the team, and we're going to start looking for some of those interviews in the coming year and tracking some of those things. And you're going to see some more changes coming up on this program. But I saw this one, Bitdefender. So they're a Romanian-based company, and they took on some new private equity and with it a $600 million valuation. Paul, here's what stood out in my mind, because that basically puts them on par of saying, hey, look, we're big. Y'all are paying attention to Kaspersky. Well, how about us? And that's exactly what went in my head was, a lot of these big companies are in the news lately and not always in the most favorable light. And so Bitdefender, basically by coming out saying, look at us, we're worth $600 million. I think it's an interesting play to at least say, we're real. Like we're all over the place. You should pay more attention to us. Any thoughts on that?
Not really, to be honest with you.
So it didn't perk your ears up?
No.
All right. Well, no. That's what we had on the week. That's the big thing.
I should probably pay more attention to Bitdefender, and I haven't.
I've heard them come up a couple times. I mean, I've seen people use their stuff, and so it's like one of those things that I've kind of paid attention to, but I haven't really paid a lot of attention to. And so, in fairness, this headline worked. Like it caught my attention, and I think that we'll see some more of that type of stuff as we go. And I'm sure as we get to the end of the year, I think we're going to see some more activity. So we'll stay on top of all of it. A lot of times we talk about how our journeys are going. Paul, how are things going for you?
Things are going really well. No major updates at this time. John and I, typically this year is time of the year is very busy for us. John's very busy teaching in pen testing as everyone wants their activities in the end of the year. So we'll have some fresh announcements next year.
Well, it's good. I look forward to it. On my end, I'm finally, and we've been talking for a year and a half now about how to be more successful as a startup, and it's that find that niche, find that product market fit, do those things, and I've been doing that, and it's working. So I've really been enjoying it. The one new thing that came up is kind of interesting is I've now had a couple of our audience reach out and say, hey, could you come to our sales kickoff? Could you come do a half day talking about value? Could you come inspire us up? And I think one of the things, Paul, that we're going to look at for next year is how do we better educate our audience to ask some of these questions that you and I ask, and maybe start looking at standardizing some of our questions so that we can really level up both the industry and the community on thinking about value and thinking about problems and stuff. And so I'm kind of excited because that's going to be a chance for me to go spend short periods of time with some teams, get them fired up, get them excited, and keep doing some of these connections. So I'm loving how everything's coming together and looking forward to where we go from here. So that's it. I think that's been a good week for us, right?
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching Startup Security Weekly. See everyone next time.